Futurist, intuitive, and time-traveling clairvoyant, Louise Hauk is here this morning to share with us how to let your spirit move you. Since she was a child, she has had the ability to see beyond the physical dimension into that place where all time occurs simultaneously. She is the author of several books, including The Adventures of a Seer, Heart Links, Fearless Future, and Beyond Boundaries. She is going to challenge our perceptions of linear time and to help us pierce the illusion of death. Please welcome Louise Hauk.
Thank you. This is one of the best speaking venues ever. 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 Of the world. Yes, of many worlds, yes. Trust me. The last time I spoke here, I began with a quote from Mike Nichols from when he received a Tony Award. He said to his competitors, "Cheer up, life isn't everything." And then I proceeded to describe how there is so much more multidimensionally within this life that you could ever imagine. And today I want to start with one of Mike Dooley's best Tut quotes. Yeah. And this one really rang my chimes. Life is where we go to temporarily believe in death, fleetingly forget our power, and briefly have the dickens scared out of us voluntarily. So when we come in, we remember to forget, and then we spend the rest of our lives trying to remember. But one thing that sustains us through the illusion and through all this pretending and expanding that we do here is the human spirit. And so today I want to talk about what feeds the human spirit and how to let your spirit move you. What facilitates it, what inhibits it, and what is the nature of the human spirit. So when I sat down and really tried to identify my wonderful spirit, I came up with a list. It's the spark that ignites the generator of our soul and propels us through eternity. It's the animating force behind our physical experience. It's the breeze that scoots us through serendipitous synchronicities. It's the nudge that points us in the direction of our most intuitive choices. It's the you that travels in and out of your body even before you drop it on a more permanent basis. It's the authentic you that vibrates the very best in the present moment. And it's the conduit through which the source reaches you. So I'd like to talk about the characteristics of the human spirit. One thing that, as I say, sustains us through the illusion, through the physical and non-physical experience, is the human spirit. And notice that I refer to the non-physical experience. For a while, many of us were referring to the other side, to leapfrog over this illusion of death. Well, people got that. But we're so physicality, locality oriented that it's very misleading. And the spirit is physically challenged. And it has a hard time with our time and location oriented reality. And so now I'm referring to the non-physical dimension instead of the other side. I have clients who will say, "Is my mother there? Is she busy?" And one of the characteristics of the human spirit is that it transmits through this streaming consciousness. I call it streaming consciousness, and it's very much like the internet. We need a brain to serve as a computer to let us interact with our physical world. But it's so phenomenal, this streaming consciousness, that takes with it unlimited memory, that goes beyond time, and this continuum of consciousness that carries the jokes, the memories, without a physical brain. My favorite example of this continuum of consciousness came when I was reading a client in London. He was a meditator. He'd lost his wife. And his wife comes in from the non-physical and says, about that conversation we were having before we were so rudely interrupted by my death. Doesn't that say it all? I just love that. And so I'm very familiar with the non-physicality, non-locality of the human spirit. That's what I tap into when I interpret for loved ones. I never have a hard time accessing them. The first thing they love to show is what dialed them in to your reality. And it's just a thought. It's an association you've made about them. In fact, that's the first category I sort their projections into. Times I've been with you. And they get obsessive. So not only were you in the kitchen looking at my picture, but your elbow was by the bowl of tangerines, and I say, okay, we get it. And they love to really specify when you dial them in, and it's the heart frequency. So this continuum of consciousness, it plays like one big game of charades. I can't say it any more accurately. And it's a two-way street. It's how well do they transmit, and how well do I interpret? It could be this, it could be that. And when I do consultations, I interpret symbolically, metaphorically, and literally. Number one, to take you behind the scenes to show you how this works. Because I present myself as an example of the multisensory, multidimensional beings we're here to become. My friend and colleague Gary Zukav, in his book, The Seed of the Soul, his premise is that for the survival of our species, we're needing to become highly intuitive, multisensory beings. And years ago, he said to me, you're going to need to teach people how to do what you do. And it was very prophetic. So I give away all my secrets, and I show what it's like to upload these images, decoding, creating my own template of interpretation. Fortunately, I'm a pretty positive person, so that's going to influence my interpretation. Unavoidably, we do have our own filter. And so when I'm interpreting literally, symbolically, metaphorically, it also doesn't let you obsess about the information. It could be this, it could be that, and the information changes meaning as time unfolds. So there can be a meaning in the present and a meaning in 2 years and a whole different meaning in 4 years, and it can all work. And so in this two-way interpretation, it's so entertaining and so delightful for me when it's a soul who's really good at transmitting. A few weeks ago, a client had a phone session with her and her mother, and she'd lost her stepfather, her mother's husband, and he'd only passed over, I think, a week before, and he was a great transmitter. His name is Rex. I have permission to use his real name. And so first he's showing some very confirming things, that first category, times I've been with you, times you thought of me, and I was right there. And then I said, now he's playing Oprah. He wants you to clear the clutter. And let me get some water. Time and space. So he was saying, clear the clutter to create a vacuum for some new opportunities. There was another relationship in store for his widow. Quite often clients think that if they move on to new relationships, it's betraying the memory of a loved one or minimizing their sense of loss when the loved one's saying, no, I'm sending him to you. You need to expand, and then he'll access new aspects in you. So I said, he wants you to clear the clutter. He's showing me a pile in the corner, and there's a splash of red. And my client said, yeah, I've just been helping Mom clear out some stuff. Just a sec. She went over into the corner. She said, it's my mom's high school yearbook. I said, he's giving me a 3-5. I don't know, March 5th, page 35. Is there something going on with someone who's 35? So they counted the pages. They weren't numbered. So I'm hearing over the phone, 23, 24, 25. And they get to page 35. And there was a circle drawn around my client's mother. She and her husband had been lovers since high school. And he'd drawn a circle around her picture back in high school. So then I never know what's going to be the clincher. So then they're really with me. And my client's mother said, "Can he tell you the word he was going to send from the other side?" Then I went into my spiel. They and I don't like to be tested. They have their own agenda. And then I said, "He's showing me a flight of stairs. And there's something odd or off about one of the steps." And my client's mother said, "Yeah, it's the steps in the back and I can't afford to repair them." I said, "Well, stay open. The universe is infinite." She said, "That's the word, infinity." This happened in a reading in the round in Sacramento years ago. Same thing. It's when I do 10 people at once, we get a nice momentum going. And I'd relayed some messages to this gal from her father, and she said, "Can he tell you my nickname?" And I said the same thing. They and I don't like to be tested. I go on around the group. I turn back around and I go, "He's going like this." She said, "That's it. I'm a flight attendant. That's my nickname, Fly Girl." So I never know how they'll position me or what they'll get me to say that has an entirely different meaning than according to my repertoire of experiences. I work with apprentices around the world over the phone, and I just invited one to join in Chicago, where I just came from. And she said, "I'm so excited. I feel like I've been accepted to Hogwarts." I thought, well, maybe that's a sub-name for my apprenticeship program. But is it Hogwart or Hogwart? Hogwart. But I position them in a way that we trick the rational mind, the linear mind, so that they can bring it through, and they astonish themselves. And they'll say, "Well, this doesn't make any sense." I have them scan my consciousness at the beginning of each session. And they'll say, "It makes no sense." And I say, "It's not supposed to. You're scanning my consciousness." I remember saying in a consultation to a woman, there was a time in your life when it's as if you were hitting a pothole with your shoe and it sucked you down below, and you're shaking your finger at someone in a white jacket. It was very empowering, but you realized you'd stayed too long. She said, "Oh, yeah." She said, "Years ago, I moved to Scranton, Pennsylvania, that's known as the pothole of the universe." She said, "I'm second to Imelda Marcos in my obsession about shoes. I worked in the basement of a hotel down below for a doctor in a white jacket who was inappropriate. I told him off. It was very empowering, and I realized I'd stayed too long." It made absolute sense. So it's ways to get the rational mind out of the way. And we are receivers when we're in the present moment. Now, the spirit thrives in the present moment. Eckhart Tolle, in his book, A New Earth, really helped me differentiate between my ego self that I call Edith, and when she's having a temper tantrum, she's Edith Ann. And when she's trying to grab the wheel and take control or be right or rehearsing the perfect conversation that'll show so-and-so, I put her in timeout with a hug. I put her in the corner. And just as Eckhart says, the moment we just observe the difference means we're back to the present moment. We're back to our authentic self, and that's where the spirit can thrive. I feel that it's as if for centuries we've been taught that if we're down and out and lowly and self-flagellating and hurting enough, maybe God will hear our prayer. When in fact, that mindset plummets us down to the basement, where it's dark and lonely, and we're crying out, "Dear God, where are you?" And the voice replies, "Up here in the lobby." And so Esther Abraham, I think, is masterful in showing us how to come up from the basement, to simply raise our vibration, to go to the feeling of appreciation or gratitude. We come up the elevator, the doors open, we're in this illuminated lobby, we're back in sync, bada bing, bada bang, we get the parking place, we get the phone call. So the whole time it's what we were doing in our head. And so when I can observe when it's Edith grabbing the wheel, I know I'm out of the beam. I'm going to be hitting the wall. The universe can't find me. When I'm back in the beam, I'm back in sync, and that's where the spirit thrives. Now, the spirit is physically challenged, as I say. And I was speaking to a couple of gals this morning. You're all so beautiful. I forgot the wonderful aesthetics of Newport Beach and Orange County. And two of you came wearing not only orange, but orange and brown. You could just match. And I was saying how when I'm meeting with a client in person, when I change my clothes at the very last minute, sometimes to a color that really isn't good on me, it's because I'm already getting into their energy field. And I'll show up sometimes not only with the same colored jacket, but the same suede colored jacket. So we get there before we get there. When you're at a job where you're feeling deadened, your spirit has left the building. Literally, it's gone on to the next opportunity, and you know that feeling. The spirit knows no boundaries. We're all over the map, in and out of the body, even before we drop it on a more permanent basis. I think last time I told my favorite astral projection story. While I was living in London, I heard that it was actually shown as a documentary in this country. And it was a woman in Ireland who kept leaving her body at night and going to this same house. She loved the house. 2 years she went around Ireland with a realtor trying to find the house. She finally finds it. Walks up to the front door. The owner opens the door and says, "It's her! It's the ghost!" So we appear as apparitions when we're out of our body. So I have an apprentice, a psychotherapist in Miami, who has been able to continually re-enlist. And she has a client with whom she'd become very close before he passed over. So occasionally in her weekly apprentice phone sessions, the three of us, Holly, me, and we'll call him James, who's passed over, play telepathy games together. I thought project to Holly's office, where I've never been, and see her at her computer desk. My light body is hanging out at her regular desk, and then I describe James as sitting pretty much where she tells me he used to park his wheelchair. And we do telepathy games. One time he took us on a tour, and I'm describing this Victorian house. We're going into the front. I go on up the stairs to this wonderful attic bedroom where I take a nap, and it's like a summer afternoon, and then it becomes an F. Scott Fitzgerald scenario, and Holly and James are out in their whites playing croquet, and I can smell the hot afternoon grass, it was just idyllic. Well, we were in his heaven. Holly later told me that was the house that her mother had just gone to open up for the summer in Connecticut. I didn't know that James had actually been a tour guide. Another client reported that her daughter, who had gone over into murky water off a bridge in her car and perished, her daughter took her on a tour of heaven. And so they're kind of flying around, and she remembers saying, "What are these sparks?" And her daughter said, "Those are other souls, Mom." And she saw her daughter's version of heaven, and it was a home pretty much like the one her daughter grew up in, but it had a 2,000-foot-long swimming pool, and about 2,000 friends were coming over for a pool party. There are a lot of predictions about 2012 coming up, and I believe that a lot of religions don't understand allegories and metaphors. And I believe it's a shift in consciousness that is already occurring. And what fascinates me, along with others who are on the front lines demonstrating the beings we're becoming, that the veil's coming down, that our experience in the physical is going to mimic more and more that of the non-physical. Now, if I'm standing here and I start to tell you about my experience going through 9/11, watching it from my rooftop, as I tell you, I'm going there. I'm seeing myself, watching the people jump and their spirits lifting up before the bodies could hit the ground. And I'm there, as I'm recounting it, I'm being there. Then I kind of have to remember that I'm here in the present with you, and I have to find my way back. And that's why I get a little tangential sometimes when I tell stories, because I'm there. And then I have to find my way back. That's how it is for the non-physical. Those of us in, well, we are also in the non-physical. That is life in the non-physical on a more continual basis. Our thoughts manifest instantly. So there's going to be much more telepathy, much less division between the physical and non-physical. I don't know what the death experience is going to be like. I experience more and more souls who have barely lost consciousness, like the guy's wife in London, about that final conversation. Where were we? So that's one factor. And telepathy is going to become so much more prevalent. We are telepathic beings. We've just been spooked about it. I went to a gathering, and just before, someone had mentioned the series Nip and Tuck. I hadn't heard of it. She just mentioned it. So I go to the gathering, and I'm speaking to a woman who is very linear, very analytical, and she's talking about her new job doing testing in the schools, and she uses the expression nip and tuck. And I said, have you used that expression before? No. Well, I didn't have the time or the inclination to explain that she had just pulled that out of my energy field. When I was living in New York, I was at Joe Jr. sitting at the counter, and a fellow hops on the stool next to me and starts singing Every Little Breeze Seems to Whisper Louise, that my father used to sing to me. Then I'm down at Sammy's Noodles, and there are two fellows talking about how they will lie to their friend who they forgot to include in lunch that day. I'm thinking to myself, just tell them the truth. Just tell them the truth. One of them says to the other, maybe we should just tell them the truth. So this streaming consciousness is truly like the internet. We really do pick up on each other, pick up, transmit. My assistant in New York, who's now in the Bay Area, a playwright, actor, she was walking, very intuitive, she was walking down 6th Avenue, and she walked by a homeless gal. And the homeless gal has her head down, and Jane walks by and she says, "Get out of my head." Jane shifts her energy, and the woman says, "Thank you." So that's how interconnected we are energetically. Now, it can be really functional chatting with others' higher selves. Number one, you can go into a meditation, picture a ball of light above your head, invite anyone with whom you need to resolve things in or out of the body, see them in your garden, and feel this conversation going on this higher level. Not to impose your will. Edith might want to get in there. But to come together on this higher level. This is happening more and more in consultations. It happened spontaneously recently with a physician I was doing a consultation for, and he's in the middle of a really wretched malpractice suit. The room filled up with the higher selves of the plaintiffs, defendants, witnesses, and so on. And so I sort of mediated. And I said, so this is an interesting drama. Why did you all come together here? And what's the point? And how can the best resolution be reached so that everyone can gain what they're in this for, why it's been configured in this way? I was meeting a friend at a restaurant years ago, and I was asked to sit at the bar while I waited for her. And so I'm sitting there, and it's a horseshoe-shaped bar, and I thought, well, I'm kind of bored. Maybe I'll just hook up with everyone's higher selves. And so I visualized this ball of energy above each one's head, and within a few seconds, everyone at the bar was looking right at me. So we do relate on this level telepathically, and here's another way that was very functional. I believe that we can access another's greater self. When I was living in a wonderful apartment on Lake Merritt in Oakland, my kids had left the nest. I had to downsize overnight. Could tell like a very sad tale, but was the best place I've ever lived. High ceilings, glass doorknobs, great view. And when I moved in, I mentioned to a few of the tenants that well, on the East Coast, they call it the super, on the West Coast, the maintenance guy, had offered to build bookshelves in my Murphy bed closet. They said, good luck. He'll never follow through. He's the town alky. Every time I thought of Richard, I thought of Richard the responsible. I accessed his greater responsible self, like Richard the Lionheart. He showed up at my door one day with boards under his arm, looking bewildered, like, I don't know why I'm here. So I call it trickle-down higher consciousness. I was going to meet a couple for dinner. The husband's very conservative, and I was kind of bracing myself. And I noticed Edith trying to get the upper hand even before I got there, so I put her in timeout. Took a deep breath, and I was reading Eckhart's book, and I opened it right to where he says that when we define ourselves by our beliefs, the unconscious feels it's getting annihilated when it encounters an opposing belief. And isn't that what's happening in politics today? So first of all, I went feeling my beliefs off to the side. I can hold certain beliefs, but I'm not my beliefs. And that got me through the evening. Additionally, I decided to chat with the husband's higher self before I got there. I was getting ready. And so I did the same thing with Richard the Responsible. I was accessing what I love about this person, his brilliance, his curiosity. I left out his opinionatedness and his Edith. But I wasn't expecting to get something back from him. I got back from his higher self something about a man driving a car. So I get to the restaurant, we settle into the booth, and he says, "Did you hear the one about the guy driving his wife down the highway?" And I wanted to say, "Already got it from your higher self." But he was already too spooked about what I do. So it's very functional. I think that's what life is like in the non-physical. We're pure consciousness. So we're not confined to physicality or locality. We stream, we telepathize. And what impedes the spirit? Well, anything that polarizes. And I know when I watch Rachel Maddow and Edith hates to be left out of anything, and I start feeling that polarization. So I've made a deal. Since Edith hates to miss anything, I've asked my body, my spirit, through my body, to let me know when I'm starting to reach the level that Eckhart says takes me below consciousness. Television that elevates, always thought Bill Moyer was elevating, as opposed to programming that takes me below the level of consciousness. When I start feeling, yeah, we're so right and they're so wrong, and that's Edith having a ball. So I've asked the spirit to work through my body and tell me when it's starting to lower my vibration. Stand away from the TV. And that's when I have to turn it off. So that's the compromise that I've reached. You know, Edith just hates to be left out, wants to know everything that's going on, but my spirit does not thrive when there's that polarization of beliefs of the heart. Also, you need to ground the wire. When I lived in California and then moved to New York, I realized that many Californians hadn't integrated their dark side. New Yorkers wear it on their sleeve. I was leaving a health food restaurant in New York, and to get to my purse, I had to take out, at that time, my Palm Pilot, my brush, and so on. The guy's picking everything up and looking at it. I said, "You like my stuff?" A Californian would have said, "Oh, I'm sorry," and would have handed it back. He said, "Yeah, some stuff I don't." So I went out thinking he likes my stuff. No explanation necessary. So you need to ground the wire. Very New Age audiences often wear me out. Seriously, I start yawning. It drains my energy because there's a pervading feeling that we've been taught for centuries that everything we need, including our connection to the source, is out of reach when it's all right here. And so there's a prevailing feeling of reaching for magic and answers outside. And so it becomes very draining. So you need to ground the wire, deal with what's on your plate. And you ask, why are we here? To evolve. And how do we evolve? By being challenged. So if we don't spiral downward into the basement and into victimhood, we'll rise up and expand and be greater than ever. And that's why we're here. So when you ground the wire, you're dealing with what's on your plate and becoming empowered, looking at it different ways, surrendering, staying present. It's kind of weary to be the spiritual warrior, to be conscious. I mean, this idea about being in alignment, it's fantastic. It is the secret of the universe. But you got to watch your thoughts. You got to watch what's going on in your head. And that's why meditation is so important. You got to give the chattering monkey a banana. I think Eckhart, in one of his books, he said that where alcohol and drugs are addictive, they're almost going to be better than what people's minds are going to be doing. We're so sped up. I think that's why there's so many CNS anomalies, all the bipolar, the ADD, and it's often very bright, very intuitive people. I think the nervous system is just on overload. So it's going to be interesting to see how this normalizes or neutralizes as we evolve and consciousness evolves and we bring that into the physical experience. It's life as we've never known it before. The other thing is the difference between right brain, left brain. And the spirit just can't get in the door when you're in your head, when you're in your left brain. If you go to my website and go to media and then gallery, there's a wonderful picture of Tinkerbell. It's a picture that a client took years ago in her home in Cleveland. Now, Inky at the time was in her 70s, and she's still as vibrant in her 80s, approaching 90. And she has a sense of wonder about life. And it's so true that you'll see it when you believe it, as opposed to you'll believe it when you see it. She saw this elemental on a poppy across her living room. And she said, "You're so beautiful. Will you stay there a minute while I take your picture?" She reached into the cabinet down below for her point and shoot. It came out on film. And just the composition is so beautiful. You can see the rainbow reflection of its wings on the wall. You can see sort of a vapor trail where it's been. So I was showing this picture in a workshop in London. And this very analytical fellow looked at it and he said, he's in his left brain, he said, "Oh, yes, that's the light refracting and rah, 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 rah." Well, the left brain cannot wrap around this kind of information. That's the part of your thoughts that's going to say, "Oh, I just made this up. Oh, this isn't real." Then I said, "Now look at the picture through your little boy self's eyes." I can almost hear a click when one goes from their left brain to their right brain, or vice versa. Then he said, "Oh." Then he could see it. You wouldn't believe the stuff that comes out of people's mouths when they're in their left brain. I have a client. Yeah, I would. You would. A client went home from her consultation and told her husband, a very successful entrepreneur, very left brain. He said, "You know how she does this. You drive up, she gets your license plate, she calls the credit bureau." That's as far as his rational mind could stretch. It's like a Mac and a PC. Never the twain shall meet. There's a wonderful book, or a wonderful story in Heartlinks. That's the book that deals with communication with loved ones. And the client gave me permission to use the whole transcript from her consultation, and she was so in her head. And I said, "Well, your husband's here. He'd passed over a few months before. And he's showing me a scene of a dog going downstairs." She said, "Yeah, that was this morning. He's not supposed to go down there, but he thinks Denny's still down there at the computer. And I don't know the password. I can't get into the computer." He's showing me a picture of a cabin. "Do you have a cabin?" "Well, yes, but didn't everybody have a cabin?" I said, "I don't have a cabin." I said, "He's showing me a picture of, like, there's something making a sound in a tree and someone's walking by." "Well, yes, at the cabin there was an owl in the tree and Denny would walk by and the owl would talk to him, cutest thing you've ever seen. But doesn't everybody know?" Finally, I said, "He's showing me a charm bracelet and there's a charm of a cabin." She actually said, "Doesn't everybody have a charm bracelet with a cabin on it?" I said, "I don't have a..." And anyway, I said, "Maybe the password is cabin spelled backwards." And that was the password. She got into the computer. The next time she had a consultation, she said, "I don't know why I couldn't think of these things. This time I'm going to just shut up." so she could hear what her left brain was doing. So you need to be able to calm that monkey. People ask me if there's anyone I can't read. I always get what I get. But the hardest person is the most analytical person. They can't abstract. I love reading artists. We just take the ball and run with it. Bada bing, bada bang. But a very concrete-minded person is so literal. I'll say to a very linear-minded client, well, who's Chris? You tell me. Well, it's her son. And I'm saying, what do you want from me? So it's just more, it's a lot more tedious. So with very concrete left brain-minded people, I say, please just listen to your recording, and you'll start to hear some things. So try to notice when you're in one or the other. You'll go from your left brain into your right brain when you're in your heart, when you have the feelings. Now, you need to be present, too. That's the other thing that helps the spirit thrive. I was reading a gal who was embroiled in a family drama. The sister and brother-in-law were trying to con her out of her mother's will. And she was defining herself by this drama. And she was going on. I thought, gosh, I can't get her present. This was over the phone. So I said, I see that you have a dog. I always have to give equal time to people's pets and plants. They're in the streaming consciousness also. And more than one cat has come through saying, in human terms, interpreting their cat thoughts, would you please tell her to stop rattling the plastic bags every time she opens the pantry? It drives me crazy. And I get, if you go to the website and put in a search for Tree Lady, there's Tina the Tree Lady, the greatest story about how the trees reached Tina. So this gal, I said, I see you have a dog. How did you know? I'm psychic. Then I said, can you go to the feeling of hugging your dog? And she said, Rex, come. No, don't go to your dog. Can you go to the feeling of hugging your dog? Pause. Oh, and I had her in the present. That's what it takes to get some people present. I can get waiters to fill my coffee cup telepathically if they are in the present. It just hooks us up. So I think that with this acceleration technologically that gets us overcommitted and on overload, something is going to equalize this, maybe as consciousness is expanding. And something is going to happen with our bodies. Now, this is the third thing about the spirit. It's physically challenged, and it's not time-oriented. It knows no chronology. I'm 64 and a half, and my spirit hangs out at 39. That's where a lot of my friends are. That's their physical age. I was on a flight from Chicago through Las Vegas. You know, you fly southwest and you stop and say, why am I in Wichita? Well, this was going through Las Vegas, and there was a couple, oops, time's up, on either side, and the woman turns to me, what do you do? And I said, oh, I'm an author. You write books at your age? But when I come through, I was having dinner once at the bar at Cheesecake Factory when I was cruising through Newport, and there were two guys behind me waiting for my stool, and they'd been to the Apple store, and they're talking tech stuff, and I knew more than they did. And so I turned around, and I could see them see me as a probably 62-year-old around that time. And then I started streaming consciousness. And I could tell when they no longer were seeing my chronological, what the body's doing, and were chatting with my soul. You can feel it fall away, that timelessness. It's been wonderful seeing you all again. This is one of the warmest, brightest, most beautiful venues. I just can't tell you. My books are out there. I'll be staying in Big Canyon until Tuesday. I'll be doing a few consultations. If you're interested, talk to me about that. Do sign up on my sign-up sheet so we can stay in touch. And I think that's everything. Do peruse the website. There's the intro that used to be the funky cassette that got passed around. You can now download it from the consultation page. I am on Facebook, kicking and screaming all the way. So I try to use it as teasers to get people to the website. So thank you so much. You're a wonderful group.